Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we've got another unscripted movie review. Haven't done one of these in a while, but this time, we're going to be talking about the newest Star Wars movie, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I really don't want to have to go through all the goddamn baggage that comes in discussing this movie now because, well, apparently baggage is a thing we have to get used to when talking about Star Wars, which for somebody for which Star Wars is a really formative experience for me, I've gone on the record of how much of a Star Wars nerd I am. The fact that there's all this political bullshit associated with this tied into the larger overarching culture war and now being drawn into a seeming war between two directors that isn't really much of a war, just a vastly disparate style when it comes to screenplay and direction and story composition. Yeah, so that's fun to start off a review of Star Wars with. I just want to go watch Space Wizards. The truth is that Star Wars has not been fun to talk about online for some time now, and that's sucked. But the larger truth is that it sucked because I feel like a lot of people have missed the point. That's what's so frustrating when you go back to discourse surrounding The Force Awakens, and especially The Last Jedi, where it seems like huge thematic chunks of the movie were just outright discarded or misinterpreted. And while I think that movie is great, it's got pacing problems, sure, and I think there's some elements that are a little questionable in terms of how well they link together. It's a little bit tenuously stretched, and for those of us who like connecting each strand of logic, that can drive people kind of crazy. I get it, but I still think it's a great movie. It's not the greatest of the comeback series of movies, that is easily Rogue One still, but I had questions and concerns going into Rise of Skywalker. I knew J.J. Abrams is coming back after the Book of Henry effectively killed Colin Trevorrow's career. For good reason, the Book of Henry is terrible. But the larger issue that I was worried about is that J.J. Abrams would switch some of the main divergent plot points that came off of The Last Jedi and try to crowbar in a lot of fan service. And I don't think this movie is that. I would not call this movie a fan service film in that regard. Not the same way The Force Awakens was, and that kind of drove me crazy. No, what this movie is might be a little worse. And to describe why, I will have to spoil some points. I will put up a spoiler warning when that happens, but yeah, it's okay. It's good at spots. It's not great. I don't think it's better than The Force Awakens. I don't think it's better than The Last Jedi or Rogue One. Actually, catch me at the wrong moment. I might say Solo is a little better too. And I know I'm one of the few people who actually like that movie, which puts in an awkward position. If we're comparing this to the prequels, I'm one of those weird guys who really likes big chunks of Revenge of the Sith, so it's kind of on par with that. Actually, that's a pretty good parallel because I think there's some commonalities between what happens in Revenge of the Sith, both in its good moments and its bad moments, and what happens in Rise of Skywalker, especially when it comes to thematic points and some of the most grounded elements that kind of come at the expense of everything else going on. Just for a little bit of spoilers, as you obviously already seen, Palpatine is back in some form. He's on some planet in the unknown regions in some form, but in what form has he taken? Who's gonna find him first? Kylo Ren's on the path to trying to find him first to potentially let the past die all the more further, or is it gonna be whatever's left of the Resistance now making their final play to save them? It's a good strategy. It's a good framing device, the chase for Palpatine for whatever it is. Even if I can look at the old comics from Dark Horse and say, oh, we're doing Dark Empire. Well, it's not as bad as Dark Empire and Dark Empire 2 were, but it was a parallel that immediately got stuck in my brain as the ascended EU Star Wars fanboy and just moved away from that, because Hexagon is not that far removed from Biss. Moving into discussion of this film, the one thing that I want to highlight is that the majority of this film is Rey focused. And I draw the main focus to that because for everyone who thinks that she was a Mary Sue-esque character coming out of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, which not really true. I've been writing fanfic for years and she's not a Mary Sue. But the one thing, she is absolutely more of the focus when it comes to any thematic weight and plot of this movie. And I'd say, like with The Last Jedi, I'd say that her arc is the strongest here, the most developed, and arguably the key to why this film hits at its best moments. The problem is that if there is a larger overarching issue with trying to have a couple different directors trying to bring a very different style of narrative from film to film, especially when it comes down to elements of pacing and screenplay construction. There's no way around how J.J. Abrams' style, his specific stylism in comparison with Rian Johnson's stylism or Gareth Edwards or Ron Howard, it's very different. And while I can grow accustomed to it, and while it did get better in the last 2 acts of this movie, The Rise of Skywalker is paced incredibly quickly. A lot of events and locations that blaze by quickly, run after another right in the very start, to the point where it starts losing a little bit of weight. And that's the first thing that kind of bugs me about this movie. For as much scale and scope as the sequel trilogy has emphasized, one thing that it's kind of done is feel honestly a little bit ridiculous. This was an issue in The Force Awakens as well, and how much a lot of stuff were just, we have to do Star Wars, but bigger. Ergo, the elements that go bigger just start seeming a little ludicrous, almost like the Ascended fanboys' idea of how to make this more cool and badass. Less of an issue in The Last Jedi because of how heavily plot and theme focused that film was. But it is also kind of an issue here, especially with Palpatine coming in as he would have out of the comics. But again, different conversation. What bugged me more, and I'm going to make a comparison to a movie that I like, and I probably shouldn't like as much as I do, but I think it has relevance here, is the MacGuffin-heavy plotline and structure of the first act, first half of this movie, where a lot of things are tracking down objects of significance to actually manage to pin down where the Emperor is on Exegor, and being able to track each step of the way, because this object, but to activate this object you need another object, but oh, that object has script on it that needs to be translated, it only can go through this person, which has to go to this place. It's tiring, but it's not given a sense of weight or depth. For one, the fanboy nitpick, you can call them holocrons, you don't need to call them Sith wayfinders, but that's jargon-esque. I don't care about that. The larger issue, if I compare to a movie, let's say, like Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which is another overstuffed film, trying to do way too much with too many moving parts and objects, but each object was given a weight and significance that was intrinsic to character motivation. Whereas a lot of the objects here, they're objects that fuel the plot but don't really tie into the characters explicitly, which is one thing I kind of gets kind of a little bit of a waste that they call them Sith wayfinders and not holocrons. The holocrons would have had some form of Jedi or Sith spirits attached to it. That probably would have increased some sort of drama just in terms of tied to that. But no, we have objects, and that does get a little bit distracting, in that you're chasing the MacGuffin through spot after spot after spot. It has the feel of a J.J. Abrams construction in that regard, because he knows he has to rattle off certain plot points. Let's go, go, go. Keep the pacing up. Because if you keep the pacing up, you'll completely forget to realize how many parts of this movie just don't work or don't make a lot of sense. Like, everything that has to do with going into hyperspace in this movie. You thought The Last Jedi was bad when it came to discussing that? Any Ascended fanboys who are going to get angry about Last Jedi should throw an absolute shit fit over what they do to hyperspace in this movie. But again, getting off topic. My larger issue with this comes in direction and screenplay composition, because it keeps the pace so quick, it doesn't let these scenes give gravitas and room to breathe. More importantly, it doesn't give you much to the characters beyond really quick quips. You get a lot of quippy dialogue, you get some back and forth, you get exposition that's kind of woven into the narrative, but the weight of said exposition is not given the impact that it almost was in The Force Awakens. That's one thing I actually kind of liked when you had Han Solo say it's true, all of it. You actually got some weight to where it came from. But for all the Sith artifice that's brought in alongside of it, with the exception of some moments between Palpatine and Kylo Ren, it doesn't have the same weight, it doesn't have the same impact, and thus when the jargon, when the dialogue comes across as quippy and abbreviated as it is, without really a ton of flair, especially when it comes to Rey's dialogue, it gets a little bit distracting. You don't have that same growth of charisma there. I was really excited to see someone like Billy D. Williams come back, but I think he was underutilized. But that's also because it feels like the script in the first half of the movie didn't have enough room to breathe and let him be utilized. That's another thing about this movie. There's a lot of characters introduced that are more side characters overall, and yes, it was an issue when it came to a film like, say, like Return Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith, if we're being brutally honest. Like, all these trilogies, they pile up and they start groaning under their own weight at some point. But the one key thing that made those movies work is that it knew how to focus and streamline on the individual emotional arcs that were overlaid over all three movies in the previous trilogy. So when it comes down to this film, and you're expecting satisfying plot arcs beyond just Rey and Kylo Ren, yeah, this is where things kind of go off the rails. Oh, God. It drives me a little bit crazy that our intrepid starfighter captain, that a lot of his leadership arc feels like it's incredibly abbreviated, especially coming off of The Last Jedi, and a lot less compelling, that there's a lot less depth, because, again, there's so much action-moving clips that I would have actually appreciated a little bit more time to breathe, especially when some of his criminality elements start getting exposed, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This is some depth to the character that we haven't seen before. Can we dwell on it for a half second, or before we have to go into the next big set piece, the next big shootout? Then we have Finn. I've always liked Finn's character. I think there's a lot of spry intelligence, and he plays the straight man in a lot of these movies. I like that. None of the development with Rose goes anywhere. It feels very abbreviated there, which I think was a real shitty move. I'm not going to explicitly blame J.J. Abrams for that, so much as just the film was overstuffed with characters. It wasn't done to actually stunt on The Last Jedi or anything like that. It just feels like J.J. Abrams wanted to take a plot in a very different direction. He wanted to double down on a lot more heavier elements, or a lot more plot-related elements that he's giving heaviness because of how the movie is shot, without considering how the movie is paced. While we're on that subject, this is one of those other films where you can tell that the loss of Carrie Fisher, you can tell that she was supposed to be originally a much heavier focal point in a lot of the storytelling and arc, and just isn't to the same degree here, and that can get a bit distracting, even though I think the scenes that she does have with Daisy Ridley are really good. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about a couple things I actually think are legit great in this movie. In terms of visual language questions and how much I think that J.J. Abrams pushes his camera tricks a little bit too much, we're at the point where there's a lot here that just does not have the same amount of weight and gravitas. And this movie in particular, I wanted some greater heft and impact and texture, which you actually kind of got in a film like, say, The Force Awakens, because there was that much use of practical effects. But with this film, with it as CGI heavy as it is, it does get a little bit distracting how oddly weightless certain scenes are. But the one thing I will give him some credit is that he can put together some stunning tableaus in this film, and that is actually genuinely encouraging and enthralling. It's a beautiful looking movie, and to just be engrossed in the spectacle, even if it might seem tissue thin when it comes to other characters. Hell, going back to Finn there for a second, one of the issues I had is that in comparison with the character arc that he had in The Last Jedi, it almost seems like he's going backwards with it on this movie. That's an active regression. I don't know why the hell that came out of here. There's also a couple character turns, like betrayals, that feel like they're very poorly placed. My larger issue is that some of this came at the expense of a really strong thematic core that I think is extended across all three movies. And this is where I will give J.J. Abrams a lot of credit for playing along with Rian Johnson and actually being able to string forth this arc, and that surrounds Rey and Kylo Ren, by far the most compelling elements in these movies. The one thing that I've often seen is that Star Wars, particularly The Last Jedi, was just looking to take a massive dump on all the legacy of the franchise, which, no. When Kylo Ren says, "Let the past die," he's the villain. You're supposed to take that as a villain speaking to that, and that the ascended Star Wars fangirl, that really, when you dive into the meta text that Rey is, that she's always been about celebrating a lot of the good elements, and celebrating the history and legacy that came with the Rebel Alliance, and that came with the Skywalkers and the Jedi. But then, and I'll give them next point, because this is where I will spoil. Turns out in this movie, Kylo Ren exposes to her that she is Palpatine's granddaughter. Aside from the fact that sons or grandsons or distant follow-up relationships from Palpatine are also a thing in the expanded universe that we've seen, this actually thematically really works well. Because you are the ascended fangirl. You don't know your past. Framing for Rey at this particular point, at one point in The Last Jedi, she sees that she wasn't special. She didn't come from that historic lineage. And you could tell that there's some comfort in like, okay, you know what? I'm just the ordinary person, but I can still aspire to be more. Then comes the twist here with her being, oh, no, you're not that. You might be the ascended fangirl that's representative here, but congratulations, you are now the heir to everything wrong with the franchise, everything corrupt and evil, and you now have to confront that deep within your soul, just the same way that Kylo Ren did, and ultimately succumb to it once again. So I like that arc that it has to be played through, and I'll give credit to Daisy Ridley and Kyle, and again for Adam Driver, some good acting and great chemistry. I like how the movie ends with regards to their characters, but go to the focus there with respect to all the rest of the character arcs. As much as I was invested in Poe Dameron, as much as I was invested in Finn, as much as we had already seen some of their arcs get deepened and enriched coming out of The Last Jedi, when the way J.J. Abrams just wanted to refocus really, really hard on Rey for the final film, it feels really ham-fisted, and it done so at the expense of a larger core, especially when your thematic arc is so much for a lot of those other Resistance characters are everyone comes together to beat the big bad enemy at the end, and a lot of large themes about togetherness, when in reality that doesn't seem to quite align with how this movie ends thematically, especially when it comes to Rey, even though that arc is by far the most developed throughout the film, and how when she confronts Palpatine. I don't know. I don't think this movie is bad. I think that there is thematic depth that is not being considered. I think a lot of people are going to take such issue with the execution when it came to the pacing and structure of the film that they're ultimately going to turn on it, and that kind of sucks, because I think a lot of the art design is really powerful. I think there are some beautiful shots. I think Rey and Kylo Ren's arc is really, really good. And again, I think there is a core to this movie that is kind of shaky, but holds up enough. I compare back to Revenge of the Sith. The core of Anakin's arc, getting to where it is here, I can see it having a similar weight as it does in this film. Haphazard execution, to be sure, but it is there. But ultimately, this is a film that seems marred by confusion and frustration and trying to react to too many things at once, with J.J. Abrams taking his very mechanical style when it comes to hitting action beats at the expense of thematic depth. That was the issue in Force Awakens, and as kind of an issue here, and considering how oversold a lot of the film comes, it feels a little bit like Ascended fanfiction, that just like the EU was. But at the same time, you know what, if you're going to make Ascended fanfiction, it's at least stylish for what it is. It's not the best Star Wars movie by any arc. Again, like, of the new resurgent movies, I think that Rogue One still holds as the best, because it actually captured that weight, had the beautiful photography, had real character growth and involvement. It checked off all those boxes, and actually felt better paced too. This, it's good. I don't think it's great, but it is good. For me, if I'm being very blunt, I have to give it a strong 6 out of 10. It's recommended. It's worth seeing. It's by no means the worst in the franchise. Attack of the Clones is not going anywhere. But yeah, you know what? If you're going for a light, fun time and never forget about this again as good popcorn fodder, it's fine. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Take all your Star Wars takes and put them down in the comments below. Happy you hear them. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys are looking to get involved in my scheduling process, or for when year-end lists are coming up, links more in the card right over there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse. May the Force be with you all, and I'll see you next time.